Hi everyone, welcome in the channel. Today we're going to talk about how to import to China. This is going to be a series, so make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like and a comment to let me know what you think about it and what you would like to know, because we're going to have part 2, 3 and probably also part 4. So moving forward with our topic, today we're going to talk about how to import to China. So there are different modes that you can use to import to China or ship to China. One is called direct-to-consumer mode or cross-border e-commerce. You simply ship from your own country to China. Or we have the general trade mode, and we also have the bonded warehouse mode. So we're going to cover those topics in another video, but just to, let's say, briefly explain you what is this about. Direct to consumer is also called cross-border commerce. We said that you can ship from outside China to China. And then we have the bonded warehouse mode, where basically you import in a bonded warehouse, in a warehouse that is controlled by customs, so that you don't have to pay or do any custom clearance, pay duties, taxes upon arrival. You just do it when you're going to clear the goods as soon as you have a purchase. So that allows you to make stock in China, build stock in China without any formalities until you actually need to send a shipment or you sell a unit to a customer. It's when you're going to go for the custom declaration. You can benefit from some, let's say, regulations that are based on the cross-border commerce or bonded warehouse mode. And then eventually we have the general trade, which is where you need to have a company or someone that acts on your behalf in China to get a license, a permit, and so on. So it's a little bit tough. So in this first part of the video series, we're going to cover about personal imports pretty much. So nowadays there are two different regulations. There's the cross-border e-commerce regulation, there's the personal import. So just to let you know, there are some countries that actually identify the cross-border e-commerce, the imports of purchases that are done through an e-commerce store, as a personal use and personal imports. There are some countries that don't identify the cross-border shipments of e-commerce, like the purchases online, as a personal import. They just basically identify them as a normal import, like a general import, where you may need a license, you may need a broker, and so on. So in this case, China differentiates the two. We have the regulation that applies to cross-border e-commerce, we have the regulation that applies to general trade, and we have the regulation that applies to personal imports. So personal imports are goods that are let's say, imported for personal use, needs to be in a reasonable quantity. Now, what is the reasonable quantities? We don't know, but we know how many shipments you can actually send per day to one individual, and that's just one. You can only ship one parcel to a Chinese consumer in China per day. So even if you try to ship something with SF Express, for example, or any courier, they're going to tell you that they can't ship more than one. So they're probably going to accept the parcels, but they're not going to ship them the same day. So whenever you see the tracking updates, you're going to see that one parcel went ahead and the other one stayed behind, and it's going to be shipped the next day. Personal imports also have some thresholds. For example, if you're shipping anything to a Chinese consumer from Hong Kong or Macau, you have a threshold of 800 RMB actually, to be classified as personal import. And then if you're shipping from anywhere else in the world, you have a threshold of 1000 RMB, where basically they consider your shipment as a personal import. Is a little bit different for, let's say, the cross-border e-commerce regulation, where you actually have 5,000 RMB of threshold to be classified and benefit from those regulations. Every time you ship something to China, just make sure that you check what is prohibited or what is restricted. You do not want to send anything they may subject to a specific regulation or may be prohibited. Now, let's look at the major problems when you ship cross-border or when you ship anything to China. First of all, declarations. Just make sure you add a description. You need to identify your goods specifically. If you're selling a female t-shirt, long short sleeves and so on, or an electrical appliance, most of the times when you classify your product through an HS code, it is not enough. Because most of the times when you go and you scroll down the list of all the tariffs and all the nomenclature and everything in order to identify the product that you're shipping to, Some subheadings have, let's say, the description of the tariff or like the HS code, which is called others. So if it's none of the above, there's another subcategory, subheading that is saying others. So you can classify your products under others, which means that once they read the declaration in the CDHS code and then the nomenclature and the correspondence description of this HS code says others, how are they supposed to classify your product if they don't know what it is, if you don't add a clear description? So you must be very, very clear. You can't write something like electronics, camera. What is this specifically? Add all the possible things that you may think of and can describe literally and physically your product. Then another case is the country of origin information on the commercial invoice. You need to make sure you add the HS code, a clear description, the country of origin. Where is the product made? Is that made in China? Is it made in Thailand? Is it made in Italy? Where is it coming from? When is it made? And then also the breakdown of the costs, like the value of the product, the shipping fees, the insurance, and anything else you may have paid for that parcel. You need to have a clear breakdown because duties and taxes are going to be assessed on the chief value, which means the value of your product with the value of your shipping fee and the value of the insurance that you paid for. So all of them summed up together, it's where the amount is going to come out and duties and taxes will apply. So just make sure you state the breakdown of those costs and the value of the parcel, and add the country of origin, HS code description, the weight. Also the weight, sometimes, there are some regulations that where the weight is also kind of affecting those regulations. So you need to make sure that when you declare 2 kilograms, it's actually 2 kilograms. 2 kilograms 100 grams, 2 kilograms 200 grams could be okay, but just make sure that anything that you write on the weight bill or the commercial invoice in terms of weight, it actually matches the actual weight of the product. Then when you ship goods that are actually samples or gifts, do not write gifts, do not write sample. There's a section in the commercial invoice which is called reason of export, and that's where you're supposed to write that little word called gift or sample or anything you want. So the reason of export is something that must be present in your commercial invoice if you want to have less troubles when shipping worldwide. And that's basically going to identify what's the purpose of this shipment. And the purpose of this shipment is either a gift, a sample, or a purchase, because the final consumer, the customer, the receiver purchased from you. So the reason you're exporting is because of a sale. And eventually, if it's a gift, you just write it there, gift. But in the description of the content of your product, of your parcel, of your order, you must state what is this about. Is a camera, is a phone, is whatever you want. Also make sure you have a value to assign to your product. Even if you ship a gift, let me tell you, there is nothing that has zero value. Nothing. You must declare something, at least the cost of the product. I mean, it really depends. I can't tell you how much you should declare gifts for, but there are countries that actually establish some, let's say there are some regulation around that. If it's a sample, you may use the cost of the product, like the cost that you had, like to manufacture a product, for example, instead of the selling price or the value or whatever. But keep in mind that as soon as that arrives at custom, they're going to pretty much verify and check if this is at a reasonable price to pay for, let's say, to manufacture this product. And they're going to maybe check your website, and they're going to look that you're selling a phone for 1,000 USD, and then eventually you declare as a 10 because it's a sample. Well, let me tell you, if they see something like that, even if you really pay the phone $10 to manufacture it, they're gonna believe it. They're just gonna reject the shipment, ask more information, and just apply a higher duty rate and change the declared value on your behalf. So just to avoid trouble, to avoid stuck parcels and then eventually being flagged continuously at the customs, just make sure you don't declare stuff at zero or at an unreasonable price. Then declaration to be in Chinese, but pretty much if you use express couriers, they already know that, they have their own brokers, but just make sure that whoever is doing the declaration for you, it's in Chinese. Then if you send something as a gift or as a sample, you have a pro forma invoice instead of a commercial invoice. Pretty much the same features. You have the reason of export, you have the price, the value, and so on. It just got a description, but it's like a pro forma. It's not a commercial invoice. Also, consignee personality is needed, so they need like a copy every time you ship. So they need to kind of match and identify the receiver. Now, if we think about regulations, right? And we're going to cover this in probably the third part of the video series, but let's say that as you have the CE mark in Europe, in European Union, you have the UKCA mark for safety. in the UK, you may have the FDA or the FCC in the US. Well, you have the same also in China, and it's called the conformity certificate, so CCC. And generally for personal use, personal imports, you don't really require to have this mark on the product. However, there are cities that make it mandatory no matter what. One of them is Shanghai. So before, let's say, avoiding to certify your products for Chinese conformity standards, just make sure you know what you are doing. My suggestion is that you always do that. First of all, because they're going to trust you more, you're going to assess that it's actually safe to sell there, and you know that you're going to have less troubles that you could have imagined. But pretty much you can check about that part. We're going to talk about this in another video. But the conformity and the CCC mark must be something that you should check, basically. Now let's say that you're shipping to China something that it actually was made in China. Well, you don't have to pay duties and taxes. There's a duty exception if you can prove that the shipment was actually, the product was actually originating from China. It was made in China, exported abroad, and then re-imported. Well, in that case, in order to have a duty exception, you actually need to prove with an export declaration that you exported and blah, blah, blah. And that's quite difficult because whoever is shipping it to you, they're probably not going to share the export declaration, which pretty much contains like all the bulky products they exported and also some prices, which pretty much is going to be the cost of the product. Now let's talk about why you should ship to China and why it's a great market. Well, because China has the highest number of digital users in the world, like digital buyers in the world. And this means there are 780 million people purchasing online from e-commerce stores and so on. So there's actually a quite big opportunity there, but you need to make sure you actually understand the culture and what are the local habits as well. First of all, they expect something that is fast and cheap in terms of shipping. They also expect a great customer service, returns options, and they expect you to also speak Chinese. They don't want to see the language barrier, which is something that pretty much happens when you purchase online from overseas companies that are not speaking your language, but English pretty much. And this brings you to have a lot of competition with local brands or brands that are well established on platforms like Tmall, JD, WeChat, and so on. They would definitely prefer to buy from them rather than from you, just because of the customer service, the language barrier, fast and cheap shipping options, because it's already present in China. Also, you have to consider the fact that right now Chinese buyers can directly buy from and purchase from manufacturers. So it's going to be super cheap, it's going to have the same features or utilities as any other brand, just like not branded maybe, but at the end of the day you are going to have some competition from local manufacturers as well, and also from other foreigner brands or international brands that actually sell on big platforms like Tmall, Taobao, maybe not really Taobao, like Tmall, JD, but do have platforms like Taobao as well, Alibaba, where they can purchase from, and then eventually from local store and retail stores. So that's pretty much something that you should keep in mind, like how you approach the Chinese market. You need to know the purchasing habits of those customers. So don't go with the thought that you're going to win the market just because your brand is great, just because your brand is international, it's coming from whatever, because you're not going to win it over. You're not going to win them over because you need to understand the purchase habits. You need to understand what they expect from a brand. It's just not the product anymore. It's just not about the product anymore. It's not. It's about the entire customer experience. Now, let's add a few more things. What sells the most in China? Cosmetics, baby care like mother and child, then we have food and beverage, and then we have footwear and apparel. Well, that's all for today. We will cover more in the next few videos. Just make sure you subscribe to the channel so you will be updated once the next video is going to go out, and you make sure to watch it and learn more about how to ship to China. Thanks again for watching. See you in the next video.